We're going to be using a piece called The Value of Philosophy. I know some professors who refuse to teach on this. I'm biased, but I'm fair. Let's go back to this idea here. Uncertainty, because it's a little weird, right? He says uncertainty, he means it to be a good thing, right? 5 goods of philosophy. What is it good for, right? That original question, what is it good for? And he says uncertainty. I say here, of course, I paraphrase it as uncertainty is a good thing. And I'll explain this, I guess. You kind of think ahead if you want. Uncertainty is a good thing. You might wonder, okay, why is it a good thing? I can understand that, philosophy, like you could have like a necessary byproduct. Of course, you're going to come across uncertainty and maybe, okay, pain and suffering is a necessary byproduct. You just got to get through it. It's just a kind of accepted fact of the world. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? So how is this a good thing? This seems a bad thing if you're uncertain. You don't know anything. So why would this be good? Well, this can be good. Let's think about what uncertainty is, first of all. Uncertainty, of course, means you're not certain, but uncertainty in epistemology, let's say. In epistemology, the study of knowledge, there is what you know, that is your belief, right? And of course, if it's supported by evidence, then that would be your evidence for that belief. So you have what you believe, you have your supporting evidence that supports that belief, but I have not even talked about certainty yet. Certainty is kind of a perspective or attitude out here about your epistemic situation, right? So like you have the belief, you have all the support and evidence for it. And then your certainty would be like, I feel pretty good about, I feel pretty confident that I've got it right. Okay. So certainty, in other words, is like a perspective. It's epistemic perspective or epistemic attitude with respect to your epistemic situation. Now, you could be really certain, really confident, let's say, about your situation, even though your situation's really bad. Let's suppose you have a false belief, or let's suppose you've got really crap evidence, but you're in a really bad, you don't actually know what you're talking about. But you could have like a real confidence and be like, yeah, I'm pretty right about it, right? We know people like this. We know people who are really confidently wrong. They're really humorous when you see them from afar. It's like, that's really funny. They're so wrong. But there's not kind of people that you actually want to have a discussion with. And because it's frustrating to talk to somebody who's obviously wrong, yet really confident about what they believe. So he's saying here, we need a little bit more uncertainty in our life. We need to be shaken out of that situation because we might be in a situation where our epistemic situation is not that good. And we have the wrong belief or we have bad evidence or something. And so being not as confident about that might be a good thing. And so I say here, it's about the journey, not the destination. I acknowledge and admit this is extremely uncomfortable for a lot of students to think like this because this is a different way of thinking. It's not the destination. What I mean by that is something like, just give me the answer, right? We discuss, for example, the trolley problem. Very famous. It's now a meme. You see it all over the time, all over the place. If you don't know what the trolley problem is, you probably haven't been on the planet in the last 30 years or something, but it's very famous trolley problem, right? Do I pull the lever and kill only one person and save 5? Or do I do nothing and then let it keep going and then trolley kills 5 people and save 1? So we'll talk about the trolley problem, and students will have a really hearty discussion, usually very lively. Students get into this mindset of thinking, they're like, what is the answer? Every once in a while, they'll vex over it, have a great discussion and everything. And I'll never tell them what the answer is or what I think, but they want to know. They're like, please tell me the answer. This whole destination, like, just tell me what to believe. Philosophy is not like that, unfortunately. And so I say, I acknowledge this is very uncomfortable. Some students are going to be like, yes, give me more of this. I love it. I can understand that because I love philosophy. But a lot of people have like more of a mindset where just tell me, for example, what is the Krebs cycle, so that I can write that down in my notes and then give it back to you, regurgitate it to you on an exam. And then I guess I can be said to know it, later. But philosophy is not like that. It's not just going to, give you stuff to memorize. and then have as facts. I mean, some of that stuff, like a date, maybe in history or a person's name or what they wrote or something like that. And that's minimal details though. The real stuff is this. What I say is about the journey. I mean, we're using a metaphor here, but what I mean by that is, it's going to ask you to think about stuff. Think about why you think about it. Think critically about stuff. Like, science is really good if you're kind of a scientific thinker. Okay, just tell me what the answer is. I can memorize it and so on. But philosophy asks you to step back and think about why that solution would be good, or examine the question itself, or so on. So I'll give you an example. I was never really good at mathematics, and it was always because I was confused about like why we were using certain symbols, or going in the order of operations, like why do it that way, and so I never really got past step one. But that's like a basic step as far as like doing well in math and being really good at it, is like, you just gotta have to buy in. It's almost like sports. Like if you're not bought in, if you're still waiting on the sideline being like, I don't know, it's just like, what, are you sure? You just got to get out there and do it. So, this is why I was not very good at math, because I was always kind of examining. But, in philosophy, this is the way things are done, right? And so, it is uncomfortable. I acknowledge that, but if you practice this, you can get really good at critical thinking, because, I've mentioned this before, but, this is what, I mean, you're not just in college to get a job, but, it is one of the things you want to get, of course, but employers are not simply interested in people who can tell them answers, right? So if that is your thinking, oh, well, I guess I'm going to get hired because I know what the Krebs cycle is. They could have just Googled that. But they want employers who can think critically about things, who can troubleshoot and problem solve, right? There's always an article that comes out about this, every month or so, it's a dime a dozen at this point. And there was one years back, Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and he was on Shark Tank and so on. He says, I would rather hire a philosophy major than somebody in business or finance or something, because those skills that they learn, they're going to become obsolete in the next 5 years. But philosophy major, I want somebody who is a critical thinker, who can adapt, who knows how to think well, even if they don't know exactly, because they can learn, they can pick up the skills, right? Whereas if you just learn the skills and nothing more, your life is going to be a mess and your career is going to be a mess, because you're not going to know how to adapt. But in any case, I do acknowledge that this is uncomfortable, but I just ask students, just buy in and hang in there, and I'll guide you through it. Okay, one last part here. He says here, where we picked up our number 3, the value philosophy is the fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. Good. But then he goes on, he says, the man who has no tincture of philosophy, that's a weird phrase and word, tincture. We never use it, but he means not somebody who's like never had a philosophy class. He means someone who has never thought about the real deep questions in life. Like, why are we here? Where are we going when we die? Those sorts of questions he mentions earlier, right? Does the universe have purpose and so on? The person who's never, it's actually really difficult for me to imagine that there would be people like this, because that sort of thinking comes so naturally to me. But imagine that there are such people. This is what he describes this person as. They go through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense. You know what prejudice is, but he doesn't mean racial prejudice, but he means something like prejudge. So he's saying prejudge derived from common sense. Now, what does that mean? Prejudices. Okay, here we have again, just like we had on the first page, him saying something bad. And at the beginning, he said, under the influence, and he combines it with something good, under the influence of science. Now he's saying prejudice, something bad, combined with something good, common sense. It's an interesting, like, rhetorical skill he's got there. But prejudices, what does that mean? Well, prejudging using common sense. Again, because think about the person who is confidently wrong. What are they? Is this somebody who's never been reflective in their thinking, never thought, right? And you prejudge situation based on common sense. He doesn't mean common sense in a good way here, as you'll see. he means like, well, everybody knows, such and such and such and such, and you're actually wrong about that or something. Or you go with what everybody believes and everybody is wrong, right? Let me give you an example of this. Did you know, and this example I use in class, you were probably taught this growing up. What is the longest river in the United States? You're probably going to say it's the Mississippi River. Wrong, actually. It's not. It's not the Mississippi River. It's the Missouri River. You can Google that. Fact check me. But we have this sort of, all these common sense things, either cases derived from common sense or from the habitual beliefs of his age or nation. Or, right, what does that mean? Well, you certain ages, certain eras, and they have their own beliefs and things that they just take for granted. It's just obvious. So like 100 years ago in this country, people, for example, thought that it was okay, even a good thing, to sterilize people who they called imbeciles or idiots, people who were mentally unfit. They would sterilize them. They would make it such that they could not reproduce. And they just thought that that was an obviously good thing to do. Like that's what you do. Like if you raise objection to that, you'd be weird. Like, but clearly that's just the spirit of the age. They were wrong about that. But you might have something that you grow up with, you kind of just, all these things, he's talking about things that you just kind of inherit, either common sense or habitual beliefs with age, or convictions which are grown up in your mind without you inherit them because they're not formed with the cooperation or consent of your deliberate reason. You don't actually believe these things because you've examined them and thought about them. You just kind of inherit them. He says, to such a man, the world tends to become definite, finite, obvious. Common objects rouse no questions, and unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. However, as soon as we begin to philosophize on the contrary, we find that even the most everyday things lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. This is the example I use to my students, number 3, because we're doing it at the beginning of the class, and I usually, read them through the taxonomy of philosophy, and I show them this chart, and we get down here, we talk about metaphysics, we talk about metaphysics deals with the sorts of things that exist. It very often is going to be weird things that, may seem plain and obvious to you at first, like causation, time, free will. And then I get to numbers, things that should obviously cause you no problem. You know what a number is. And then I draw the number 3 on the board. You can see this in one of my short videos or in my video on using this exact chart. Maybe I'll link it up here, but I draw the number 3 and I say, what is this? And they all say number 3. And I say, well, yeah, it was the easiest question all semester. And unfortunately got it wrong. It's not the number 3. This is the symbol for the number 3. Because if this is the number 3 and then I go over there and I erase it, I say, if that was the number 3, then I destroy the number 3 and all of mathematics is thrown into chaos. Whoops. That means that can't actually be the number 3, obviously. But that also means what entailed from that is that numbers can't be physical objects. Numbers are not physical objects because physical objects are destructible. And that's not some kind of clever riddle that I'm trying to put forward. As Russell says here, as soon as we begin to philosophize, on the contrary, we find even the most everyday things like numbers, the number 3, lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. That's what he's describing. He says here, and this will lead us to our number 4, his 4th good. He says, philosophy, though unable to tell us with certainty what is the true answer to the doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free them from the tyranny of custom. That's really a phrase, tyranny of custom. So he says here, and he says, he moves on to another topic here, apart from utility and showing, but that's what he just described, unsuspected possibilities. He's saying that it has a certain usefulness, philosophy does, in showing us unsuspected possibilities. So, as you see here, that is what I have put for number 4. Another good of philosophy is that it shows us unsuspected possibility. And I say here, especially for the closed-minded man, no tincture of philosophy, like we saw, nobody who's just kind of thought anything about it, not reflected upon anything, developed his beliefs through common sense habits and the worlds around him. Now, so I say here, I'm not sure whether I picked this up for the reading or just kind of added it into my notes. Kind of went rogue on this, but when I teach this, I tell students, look, this is a good process to philosophize. That is, to not be in this situation where you're a man with no tincture of philosophy, but where you examine your beliefs And I say it's good whether the belief was originally false or true. Now, it's obvious why it would be good if the belief was originally false, because you go through this whole self-reflection, you like examine the belief. If I had a bad belief, if I had a false belief, cool. I figure it out and I update and I correct it, and then I end up with a true belief. Great. But I would argue that this whole process of going through things and examining your beliefs and reflecting upon this is still good, even if that belief originally was true to begin with. And you went through the whole process, and well, it seems like a big waste of time, right? Because you like, why go through that? I had the right belief, the true belief to begin with. So all that was for nothing, right? No. And you might think to yourself, pause this video if you want, and think, why would that be a good thing? I mean, because it does seem like a waste of time. And at this point, I would pause here in a lecture, and I'd say, well, why would that be a good thing? You start with the true belief, go through that whole process, end up with the same belief, then you realize it was true. And so you keep it. Cool. Well, the good thing about that is, first of all, it keeps you open-minded because you don't know ahead of time which one of your beliefs is true or false. So the fact that you're going through this process is good. You don't realize that it was a true belief. And it's not a waste of time also because you don't just recognize and realize at the end of the process that your belief was originally true. You now, on this side of things, have really good reasons for why you believe that belief. This is kind of uncomfortable business of philosophy, but I think it's really good and healthy. Aristotle has this quote. He says, it's the mark of an educated man to entertain a thought without accepting it. This is what it means to be educated, to be able to entertain a view. And just because you're thinking in the opposite way of thinking, like, that could be, maybe my belief's false, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to endorse that way of thinking, right? We need actually more of this because, especially in our divisive political world or a divisive religious world, I would love to see more of this rather than people who can't understand the other person's position. Like, you should be able, if you're a good critical thinker, a good philosopher, you should be able to really describe the other view that you're opposed to, the other camp. You should be able to not only describe what they believe, but why they believe it, give good reasons, right? And if you can't, then you're just being tribalistic. You're not actually thinking well, I think. So, for example, like if you're pro-life, you should be able to say why a pro-choicer would be a pro-choicer. I think that's a really important point. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that you're going to accept the other view or accept their arguments or anything like that, but you're putting yourself in the shoes and thinking like they think, and that's just being a good morally good person too. So, not only just a good thinker, you're being a good morally good person. You're being sympathetic, empathetic. Okay, now we've come to number 5, and we're almost done with our reading. So let's take a look at here, and of course he's bracketing that because he's already talking about apart from that. Yeah, okay. He says philosophy has a value. Oh, there it is again. Perhaps its chief value. Oh, so this one's probably the most important. He says, what? Through the greatness of the objects which it contemplates. Okay. Now, what does that mean? The greatness of the objects which it contemplates. Well, let's see what I wrote in my notes. So I say here, for example, the objects that a sports fan contemplates are things like statistics, athletes, teams, players, colors, logos, that sort of thing, right? That's cool. The objects of our attention, if you're a sports fan, right? That's cool to think about those things. The objects of my attention are the things I think about. The objects a philosopher contemplates, however, are going to be much more important, more higher, so and so on. They include the meaning of life, the ground of all reality, and so on. These are going to be a lot more than just sports statistics, right? Now, I think that's unobjectionable and very obvious, right? Now, notice what is being claimed here and notice what's not being claimed. It does not say that a philosopher is more important or higher than a sports athlete. It does not say that the discipline of philosophy is more important than other disciplines. It doesn't say anything like that. It says the objects of attention, the things that a philosopher thinks about, are going to be the most important things that anybody can ever think of. That's the claim here. And I know it feels kind of, this is where they get to that point where like, oh gosh, philosophers sound so arrogant. They always got their nubby little hands, everybody's business, and always trying to tell them what to do about their own disciplines and so on. And they've already got something to say, and they think they're better than everybody. This is not what he's saying. He's not saying the philosophers are better. He's not saying the philosophy is better. He's saying that the things that philosophy thinks about are better. And if you just go with that claim, as offensive as it sounds, well, is it true that the meaning of life and the ground of all reality is more important than sports statistics and athletes and so on? And yeah. So this is unobjectionable. So now here's another important point. He doesn't say this, but he does not say that only a philosopher can think about these things. This is entailed from the way he describes it. He says, this is the objects which are great, not just it's the business of philosophy. Only you kind of gatekeeping, nobody else can do this. No. Anybody can think about these things. Anybody. And so anybody can think about these things, which are the greatest things to think about. So he's not taking any claims to philosophy as being better than any other discipline, but it only gets that status of being better not because of the people or the way we teach or because of the things that we think about and the things that we teach. And it's very, very necessary. So I say here, again, it's the questions themselves. See number 3, things like this, like some questions, many of the spiritual nature are just unsolvable in human intellect. The content of the discipline of philosophy, which is important here. I say here, is contemplation, Russell says, leads to freedom from narrow and personal aims. You're not just shackled in that common sense thinking or the mindset of the age or era that you're in. So, yeah. So to finish out here, it says, thus, to sum up our discussion, and this is something you could probably add at the end of your notes, but I guess I ran out of room or whatever, paper space or something like that. I just got my 5 things and went with it. But here, so he says, to sum up our discussion, you could probably add this to the end. The value of philosophy. Philosophy is to be studied. There it is again, the value of philosophy. And it's conjoined with the philosophy ought to be studied. Why it ought to be studied was what he said on the first page. This is what he says on the last page. Now, he says, not for the sake of any definite answers to its questions, since no definite answers can, as a rule, be known to be true. Now, I would disagree with this with Russell. We do have definite answers that can be known to be true, but a lot of them are going to be kind of left over. We've been doing philosophy for a long time, 3,000 or so years. So made a lot of progress, and we're kind of left over with the residues, he said. So it may look like that now, but I still think you can find definite answers and that they can be known to be true. But in any case, that's just a quibble there. He says, not for the sake of any definite answers, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves, because these questions enlarge the conception of what's possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance. This is that kind of closed-minded, confidently wrong attitude, dogmatic assurance, which closes the mind against speculation, above all because through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great. It becomes capable of the union, that universe. I don't like this. This is him being atheist. If you were a theist, you would say capable of that union, not with the universe. Why would you union with the universe? What would that mean? Anyway, you're just talking gobbledygook at that point. But you're talking about union with your creator, who made you and made you to think about these sorts of great things. But in any case, that's philosophical disagreement again. So in any case, that is all. Of course, if you're not subscribed, let this be a reminder from my wife to make sure you subscribe. And I look forward to hearing from you next time. Take care.